But what came out from all of our research and the learning we took from other regulators was that this wasn't particularly a problem that we could assess our way out of. There wasn't going to be a way that we could look at every single pharmacy professional and do some kind of periodic assessment of their capability or their proficiency without bringing in undue cost and undue burden to the system. And also, it wouldn't be very effective for the diversity of the ways that pharmacy professionals actually practice in reality. Calling different people their service users, working for different purposes in the wider system, some people working in academia and some people working in primary care and some people working in the community setting in hospital and others, and it just goes on and on. There's more than 80 different roles and settings of pharmacy practice that we identified in our earliest stages of the revalidation programme. So with that in mind, we knew that we need to do something different, and that was encourage reflection. So why does a regulator actually have an interest in reflection? Well, the answer is because it serves two functions, really. The first is that members of the public take assurance from the fact that you're constantly seeking ways to improve your practice for their benefit. And the second thing is that actually the process of reflection drives that incremental, small changes in everybody's practice that drives everything forward and improves the system as a whole. So that's what it's for and that's what its function is. But reflection, as I've said, isn't something we can necessarily assess. It's an internalised thought process, and what that means, therefore, is that we need to be quite realistic about what it is we can achieve through the revalidation process in that encouragement. And one of the things that we realised about reflection was it's enhanced by involving other people in it, and that's why we are bringing in the peer discussion element. So there'll be a bit more of information around that. But just to let you know about how the different components of revalidation interact. So the first bit is annual renewal that you're absolutely familiar with. The reason why we have tied the submission of your records to annual renewal is to basically break a bit of a perverse incentive that existed in the old model of 5-yearly submission, which was that for many of you the burden of recording was just so off-putting that you waited until we sent a letter 6 weeks out from your renewal deadline and did the bulk of your recording of your CPD in a weekend sometime before your revalidation renewal period. Completely understand why you would do that, I'd probably do the same. But it wasn't very helpful, and the amount of work you needed to do and the amount of time you were looking back over meant that those reflections weren't particularly valuable. And it kind of means that if it wasn't meaningful for you, it wasn't going to turn out to be very meaningful for us as an exercise in trying to regulate either. So we've broken the work down into smaller chunks basically each year. We then took the CPD process itself and then gave you less to record over that course of that year. So it's not 9 entries, it's 4 entries, and the amount that you need to record for each entry has been reduced, but its focus has been changed as well. That means you need to tell us a bit more of a story about how you've applied that learning using a real example, and you need to be looking there for how that application of that learning has had a benefit for the people you call your service users. So possibly patients, possibly colleagues, possibly students, trainees, possibly anybody. With the time that we created, we're adding in the 2 new bits. I'll come on to reflective account last, because that's where we're going to spend most of the day. But the reflective account is the part where we weave our standards for pharmacy professionals, which became effective in May of this year, back into the process. Each year we're going to say there are 3 standards we would like you to choose 1 or more of to reflect on using a real example from your practice about how it is you meet that standard and why that's a benefit to people who use your services. You'll remember that those standards are different from the way they used to be. There are only 9 of them. They're outcomes focused. They apply to everybody's practice, no matter where it is that they practice as well. So we know from our pilot that was something that people are able to, and we hope it'll be something that will encourage people to return to the standards on a periodic basis. Now, the third and final part, or fourth and final part of the framework, is the peer discussion, which is where we're going to spend a lot of time today. Just a couple of headline facts about what it is. Not an assessment. It's a place where you're supposed to feel protected and safe and trust the person that you're having that reflective conversation with. It's not necessarily about a specific incident, it's a bit more of a holistic view of you as a practitioner, and it's something that you use to help encourage your own reflective process by bringing somebody else into it. And that means that they have to be free to ask you questions about your practice. It might be someone who knows you intimately, but it might also be somebody who's a bit of distance from you because of the fact that actually that's the better reflective conversation that you can have in that year. It might be a health professional, it might be a pharmacy professional, it might not be. It might be another health professional, it might even be someone who doesn't come from a health professional background. It depends on who's the most valuable and trusted person for you to drive out those reflections for you. What we asked you to record in this, because it is the safest space within here, is not the content of the discussion, but who that person is. Because if we select you in our review process, we might decide to contact that person and check to make sure the conversation has happened. Never ask what was discussed, just that the conversation took place. And then we ask you to record again a reflection on the benefit that that's had for the people who use your services. So that's the briefest of rundowns on revalidation. If you want to find out more in a presentation format, there's one up on our website, where I go on for about 22 minutes and tell you about all the details. And then also please do read the revalidation framework. I'll hand over to Ravi now to take us through to the next section.
So I suppose some things to consider before sort of the peer-to-peer discussion, as someone quite nicely put it, these are some of the stuff that's already available in the GPHC guidance, but I just thought I would end up just going over them just in case we didn't know. So as mentioned, your peer can be absolutely anyone. It can be a pharmacist, can be other healthcare professional, it can be a service user, it could be absolutely anyone that you feel will enhance your practice as well. There are some exemptions of this, particularly if it's a personal relationship you have with that person, probably not the best person because it's likely to bring in some bias. If those people are your peers are conflicted, or if there's any other business-to-business arrangements that's happening in place, and any other healthcare professional that's unfortunately under a sanction from a regulator as well. As Simon did mention, you don't need to necessarily note the details of what actually happened in that sort of in that peer-to-peer discussion, apart from the date. But I would recommend you do jot a few notes down, because when you have to submit your peer-to-peer discussion on, you might want to just remember what was actually discussed and some things that you may want to account for in that submission as well, as part of your renewal. So, as Amma again quite nicely mentioned, it's completely confidential, this discussion. It should be a nice open environment for you to have a honest and open discussion. And the great thing about it doesn't necessarily need to be face-to-face. So it can be on web chat, can be on Skype, can be over the phone, just, you know, it can be whatever works for you in that sort of period that as well on a day-to-day basis. And important to know that you can select your peer. Your employer does not select that peer for you as well. So just to have into as a mental note. If this were to work. So I suppose what makes a good one, so these are some recommendations from PDRs that I've been doing with sort of younger pharmacists that are working in general practice at the moment, just sort of stuff I've taken to those in objective settings. It's an important process, particularly if you're going to be discussing this, so take it seriously, take some time up to prepare about what you would like to discuss in that peer-to-peer discussion as well, and that will definitely help your peer channel some questions towards you. It's got to make something that makes you think, step back and out of your clinical practice and make you to reflect, and enable you to sort of think about how you develop your scope of practice and your development. I'll whack a couple more. It should be more focused and structured. Tends to be a bit better. So if you want to discuss particular things, have some certain sort of points you would like to address within that peer discussion to showcase your breadth of knowledge, your scope of practice, or what you've done differently would be a good to sort of go with. I mean, someone talked about this just before, it has to be honest, it has to be positive and constructive. We don't want it to be negative. It's not there to slander your clinical practice at all as well. This is meant to be quite an inclusive discussion. It can be a bit critical of your practice, but that's what it's meant to be. It's meant to be an open environment that does that. I always say that you should always be polite and professional. You all should be, part of a regulator as well, and showcasing that as part of these peer discussions are really important. But what it should highlight is what you're doing really well, and continue to do that to help you improve practice and deliver the same type of clinical patient care, but also help identify your CPD and identify areas of practice that you would like to improve on. And essentially that's what's going to help benefit the service user, the patient as well, and your other healthcare professionals you're working alongside. I suppose if you are the peer that's interviewing a pharmacist during this process, some questions that can help stimulate some of the conversation, which might be quite useful, is why did you decide to do it that way? Were there any options? What happened next? If it was in relation to an audit that you may have done, or a quality improvement project, what steps did you take to respond to that? How did it make you feel? What would you have done differently in the future? And these are just simple questions that you can just do during coaching or mentoring of an individual that will help stimulate some of the discussion. If I'm discussing a case study on hypertension with one of my junior pharmacists, we will be discussing, what would if you had a different patient with this type of situation, what would you have prescribed? If the renal function was slightly suppressed, what else would you have done? Where would you have found the information if you didn't know, for example? And that can help feed into your CPD, but also into sort of that reflective discussion as well. So I suppose it's a bit of role play time, and I wanted to do this to showcase an example of a peer-to-peer discussion, and then, surprise, surprise, give you guys an opportunity to discuss with a partner next to you. And it's important to not be shy. This is a nice environment to just have those initial discussions with.